London, 1836. A city of wealth and power. The beating heart of the British Empire, where fortunes were made, and the empire's gold lay hidden behind the thickest walls ever built. The Bank of England. A fortress so secure, it was said not even the devil himself could break inside. But beneath the polished marble floors and towering columns of London's financial district, another world existed. A world of tunnels, darkness, and filth. A maze of sewers stretching for miles under the city. And it was here, far below the empire's vaults, that a man stumbled upon a secret. A secret so shocking, it could have changed the history of Britain forever. 19th century London was a city of extremes. Above ground, wealth, empire, and grandeur. Below, poverty, disease, and toil. The Bank of England stood as a symbol of trust and stability. Established in 1694, by the mid-1800s, it was the financial fortress of the world. Inside its walls rested the gold reserves of the empire, protected by thick stone and iron. But while the empire's elites calculated fortunes in its chambers, thousands of men toiled unseen beneath their feet. Sewer workers, often called tashers, risked their lives in darkness, navigating the labyrinth of drains that carried the city's waste. For them, survival meant crawling through filth for coins, trinkets, or scrap washed down from above. To the bankers, they were invisible. To history, they were forgotten. And yet, one of these men would one day walk closer to the empire's treasure than anyone before him. The Bank of England was not just a bank. It was the bank. To steal from it was unthinkable. Its walls were said to be impenetrable. Guards patrolled. Vault doors weighed tons. And the building itself was a statement of power, a temple to money in the heart of London. For ordinary Londoners, the bank represented untouchable wealth. For the empire, it was survival. If the gold inside vanished, Britain's power would collapse overnight. Every safeguard, every precaution, was taken to ensure the vault was beyond human reach. Or so they believed. London's sewers were not yet the clean and engineered system we know today. In the early 19th century, they were a patchwork of ancient drains, medieval tunnels, and forgotten watercourses. Few ventured there willingly. The air was choking, the ground unstable, and death by drowning or collapse was always near. But in this underworld, men earned their living. Armed with little more than a pole and a lantern, they waded through the darkness. They memorized the maze, learned where lost trinkets collected, and where tunnels ran deep under the city. And one day, in the midst of this daily grind, one sewer worker discovered something no one had ever imagined. A forgotten passage that did not lead deeper into waste and water, but upward, toward the empire's gold. This was not a thief. He was no criminal mastermind. He was a laborer, an anonymous man surviving in the filth of London's underworld. Yet fate led him to a secret the empire never intended him to find. A direct path from the sewers into the Bank of England's gold vault. History remembers it not as a heist, but as the heist that never happened. The story would nearly vanish from record, retold only in whispers, rediscovered in archives, and dismissed as legend. But it was real, and it began with one man, a lantern, and a hidden tunnel beneath the streets of London. To understand the weight of his discovery, we must first understand the world he lived in. The world of Victorian London, where extremes of wealth and poverty collided, and where beneath the empire's glory, secrets waited in the dark. London in the 1830s was a city bursting at the seams. Its streets echoed with the clatter of carriages and the cries of market sellers. Smoke from countless chimneys hung thick in the air, staining the skies a permanent gray. To the world, it was the proud capital of an empire, the beating heart of global finance and trade. But beneath its grandeur, London was a city of contradictions. For every glittering ballroom, there was a slum. For every polished banker, there were thousands of laborers, unseen and unheard. And nowhere were these extremes more visible than in the worlds of the Bank of England above and the sewers below. At the center of London's financial district stood the Bank of England. Built of stone and iron, it was called the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. To Victorians, it was more than just a bank. It was the anchor of the empire's economy. Its vaults held the nation's gold reserves, bullion that underpinned not only Britain's currency, but trust in its global power. Merchants, nobles, and governments across the empire depended on the stability of this fortress. Its walls, some over 8 feet thick, were designed to repel any attempt at intrusion. The bank was considered untouchable, its security unquestionable. In the public imagination, if there was one place in the empire that could never be breached, it was here. Just streets away, life was very different. London's East End swelled with the poor. Families of 6, sometimes 10, crammed into a single room. The air reeked of waste, and disease was constant. Children scavenged in gutters, and men fought daily for work that barely paid enough to survive. Among these forgotten workers were the men of the sewers. They descended into the darkness day after day, armed with nothing more than a lantern and a long pole. Called tashers, they scavenged for coins, jewelry, or scrap washed down from the streets above. The work was dangerous. Poisonous air, sudden floods, collapsing tunnels. Death lurked at every corner. But for many, it was the only way to survive. To be a sewer worker was to live between two worlds. Above, the wealth of empire. Below, the filth of its hidden veins. The men carried long poles with hooks, using them to probe the black waters for valuables. Some carried rats on their shoulders, trained to warn of toxic gas. The tunnels themselves were ancient. Parts were medieval drains. Others were Roman waterways still in use centuries later. It was a labyrinth few could fully map, and fewer dared explore. But those who did knew the city in a way no gentleman ever could. It was in this underworld that fate guided one anonymous man toward a secret no one believed possible, a path to the empire's gold. Rarely did the worlds of banker and sewer worker collide. One dealt in fortunes that stretched across oceans. The other hoped for pennies in the muck. Yet in Victorian London, their worlds were closer than either realized. Above ground, the bank directors debated interest rates and gold shipments. Below, sewer workers trudged through drains that ran beneath the very floors of the vault. The irony is almost poetic. The empire's greatest treasure resting above its greatest squalor. Two worlds divided by stone, yet sharing the same ground. History often hides its most remarkable moments in the lives of ordinary men. The sewer worker who stumbled upon the bank's secret was not a thief, not a mastermind, and not even remembered by name. He was a man doing his job in the shadows, when chance led him to history's strangest near heist. Before we uncover his discovery, we must ask, how could such a thing even be possible? How could a worker in rags find his way into the heart of the most secure vault in the empire? The answer lies not in skill or intent, but in the forgotten complexity of London's underworld. In the next act, we descend deeper into that world, following the worker's lantern through darkness until he stumbles upon the impossible, the hidden tunnel that led to the empire's gold. It was a routine day for one of London's anonymous sewer workers. Lantern in hand, pole in grip, he waded through foul waters in search of the smallest scraps of value. To him, it was another day in darkness. But in the shadows beneath Threadneedle Street, he was about to stumble upon something no man outside the bank was ever meant to see. A discovery so unbelievable that it would summon the directors of the bank themselves into the sewers. The drains beneath London were a labyrinth. Some passages were wide enough for carts, others barely wide enough for a man to crawl. The worker knew the dangers: stagnant air, sudden collapses, rushing floodwaters. Yet he pressed on. On this day, His lantern revealed something unusual, a draft of fresh air where none should have been. It whispered through a crack in the old brickwork, faint but steady. Curiosity drew him closer. With his pole, he tapped at the wall. The hollow echo answered back. He worked at the wall carefully, loosening crumbling bricks. Behind it was a narrow shaft, old, forgotten, unseen on any map. He squeezed through, his lantern barely fitting. On the other side, the ground sloped upward. The air was cooler, the space eerily quiet. As he followed the slope, his boots struck something solid beneath the muck. He bent down. It was not stone. It was iron. He cleared more muck and rubble. What emerged stopped him cold. A massive plate of iron, reinforced with rivets. He tapped it with his pole. The hollow, metallic sound echoed back, deeper than any drain. He froze. He realized what he was standing on. Beneath his feet was no ordinary wall, no ordinary floor. It was the very underside of a vault. The vault. The one place in London said to be impenetrable, and by sheer chance, he had crawled into its shadow. He had two choices. He could stay silent, keep the discovery to himself, perhaps try his luck at chiseling further. But such an attempt would mean certain death. Guards above, stone and iron in every direction. The vault was unbreachable from below. Or he could report what he found. But to whom? Who would believe a sewer worker? In a city where the poor were dismissed as liars and thieves, who would trust his word? Eventually, word reached the directors of the Bank of England. The story seemed absurd. A sewer worker claiming to have found a path into the vault. At first, they laughed it off. The vault was impregnable, but curiosity and fear gnawed at them. What if he was telling the truth? To their alarm, they realized they could not afford to ignore him. They summoned him, and together, a party of directors descended into the sewers, guided by the man they would not even normally acknowledge on the street. The directors followed him through the tunnels, skeptical and patient. Then, he brought them to the breach. He shone his lantern across the iron plate. Silence. Every man in that tunnel recognized what they were seeing. They were standing beneath the very vault of the Bank of England. The fortress that was supposed to be untouchable was, in fact, resting upon a forgotten drain. The directors were shaken. They ordered silence, secrecy. The very existence of this weakness, if known, could spark panic across the empire. For his discovery, the worker was brought to the bank, scrubbed clean, and given an audience few men of his class ever saw. The directors thanked him and, in a rare gesture, rewarded him with a sum in gold. History records no name. His story was buried almost as quickly as it surfaced. But in that moment, a man who spent his life among the filth of sewers stood face to face with the empire's treasure and left richer than he had ever dreamed. Immediately, the bank reinforced the vault, sealing every possible weakness. The episode was never publicized in its time. To admit that the vault had been accessible, even for a moment, would have shattered confidence in Britain's financial heart. The man returned to his life, vanishing back into obscurity. History remembers him not by name, but only as the sewer worker who found the vault. Yet in his brief moment of discovery, he revealed a truth the empire never wanted known, that even the strongest fortress may rest on fragile ground. But this story is more than a curious anecdote. It is a window into the fragile balance of Victorian Britain, a society built on extremes, where the invisible labor of the poor propped up the wealth of the empire. To understand the true weight of this discovery, we must step back and explore the deeper contrasts of the age. The sewer worker's discovery was quickly silenced, hidden from public knowledge. But history, when examined closely, reveals truths that echo far louder than the whispers of a single man. His stumble into the bank's foundations was more than an accident of brick and mortar. It was a metaphor for an age, an empire gilded in wealth, yet resting on cracks it could not admit. The Bank of England's vault was not just a storage room. It was a symbol. To Victorians, it embodied permanence, order, and power. The vault represented the idea that Britain's empire was unshakable, that its wealth was eternal, and that its foundation was unassailable. Yet here was proof, in the most literal sense, that this foundation had cracks, that the empire's security, like the brickwork beneath the bank, was only as strong as its weakest link. The worker's lantern had illuminated not just iron plates, but the illusion that wealth could be entirely secure. The irony of the discovery cannot be overstated. Above ground, gentlemen calculated fortunes measured in millions. Below ground, the worker risked his life for pennies and filth. Yet both occupied the same square of earth. The bank's gold sat directly above the city's waste. The empire's wealth literally rested on its poorest laborers. The story revealed what Victorians rarely admitted, that their prosperity was inseparable from the toil, the hunger, and the suffering of the masses they overlooked. In the Victorian age, Britain seemed untouchable. Its navy ruled the seas, its merchants dominated global trade, and its gold backed the world's currencies. But the sewer worker's story is a reminder of fragility. Every system, no matter how grand, rests on unseen foundations. Just as the bank's vault unknowingly rested on a forgotten drain, the empire itself relied on vulnerable networks, colonies, supply lines, markets, and human lives. A single disruption could shake it all. The irony was that the strength of Britain's empire often made it blind to its weaknesses. The story of the sewer worker never reached Victorian newspapers. It was quietly buried, and perhaps that was deliberate. Imagine what the public would have thought if they learned that a laborer had stumbled into the shadow of the empire's gold. Confidence is the lifeblood of finance. To admit vulnerability could have sparked doubt, fear, even panic. So the directors chose silence. They patched the walls, tightened security, and rewarded the man just enough to keep him quiet. For the empire, the worker's discovery was not a story to be told. It was a danger to be erased. What does this story teach us? That power is never absolute. That wealth is never truly safe. That the gap between rich and poor is both physical and symbolic. A gap wide enough to hold an empire, yet close enough that a single worker could bridge it. The sewer worker's discovery reminds us that history is often shaped not by kings, generals, or bankers, but by ordinary people who stumble into extraordinary places. And that sometimes the smallest act, a man tapping bricks with a pole, can shake the illusion of permanence. The man vanished back into obscurity, his name forgotten. But his story survived, not in the official records of empire, but in whispers and fragments, retold as an oddity of history. Yet when we look deeper, it is more than an oddity. It is a mirror of Victorian Britain itself, a reminder that beneath the empire's marble pillars and golden vaults lay the unseen world of the poor, the laborers, and the forgotten. In the next act, we return to that world, to the men who lived and died in the sewers, and what their hidden labor reveals about the age. The sewers of Victorian London were more than tunnels of waste. They were a hidden world, a shadow city that sustained the gleaming metropolis above. In this world, men known as toshers risked their lives daily, wading through filth in search of coins, trinkets, or even scraps of metal that might buy them a meal. Their lives were lived in darkness, but their labor was inseparable from the empire's wealth. For it was in these forgotten spaces, unseen and uncelebrated, that the very foundations of London's grandeur were maintained. Toshers formed a peculiar brotherhood. They carried long poles with hooks, searching the muck for valuables. Their clothing was coated in tar to protect against sewage. Some trained rats to sense dangerous gases. Others memorized secret maps of the tunnels, handed down through generations. The toshers were poor, but resourceful. They made a living from the city's waste, surviving on what others lost or discarded. For them, The sewers were not a place of horror. They were a place of opportunity. The work was perilous. Toxic gases could suffocate a man without warning. Flash floods could sweep him away in seconds. Collapsing brickwork might bury him alive. Rats swarmed in the darkness, biting at exposed skin. And then there was disease. Cholera, typhus, and dysentery thrived in the waters they waded. Few Tashers lived long lives. Most bore the scars of their trade. Their lungs rotted, their bodies broken. Yet for many, the choice was simple: the sewers or starvation. Tashers had their own economy. Scrap metal, coins, and lost jewelry were sold discreetly to pawnbrokers who asked no questions. A lucky day could mean enough food to feed a family for a week. A bad day might mean nothing but hunger. The most skilled Tashers memorized the city's drainage patterns, knowing which streets yielded the most valuable refuse. In a sense, they were early urban archaeologists, uncovering the accidental history of a city through its waste. To Victorian society, Tashers were invisible. They were dismissed as scavengers, their existence unspoken in polite company. Few newspapers ever mentioned them, and when they did, it was with disgust or ridicule. Yet the irony was clear. These men, despised and ignored, were the very ones who stumbled into one of the greatest vulnerabilities of the empire's wealth. In the shadows, they saw what the gentlemen in top hats never could. Above ground, Victorian London pulsed with music halls, theaters, and endless commerce. The streets bustled with carriages carrying the wealthy to dinners and galas. Below ground, the air was damp, heavy, and silent, but for the drip of water and the scurry of rats. Life above thrived on spectacle. Life below survived on scraps. And yet, both worlds shared the same foundations. Without the unseen network of drains and the men who kept them navigable, the city would drown in its own waste. Despite their hardships, the Tashers were men of humor, resilience, and camaraderie. Stories tell of them singing folk songs in the tunnels, trading jokes in the darkness, and protecting one another in moments of danger. They lived hard lives, but not hopeless ones. Their humanity thrived in the shadows, even when society refused to see them. The story of the sewer worker who found the bank's vault is inseparable from the larger truth that the poor, though despised, bore the city on their shoulders. The empire's fortunes flowed above, but its survival depended on those below. Every coin that left the vault, every shipment of gold, every financial decision, all of it rested, quite literally, on the unseen work of men crawling through tunnels. The worker's discovery was not only a chance accident. It was a revelation of balance, the empire's highest wealth mirrored in its lowest labor. The sewer worker's story might have been silenced, but his world was real, a world where life and death were decided daily in the darkness beneath London streets. And as we turn to the closing acts of this story, the question remains, what does this forgotten tale tell us about the empire itself, about wealth, about power, and about the fragile line between security and collapse? Every empire tells itself it is unbreakable. Rome once believed it eternal. Spain believed its wealth infinite. Britain, in the 19th century, believed its empire unshakable. The Bank of England, with its granite walls and iron vaults, was the physical embodiment of that belief. Yet the sewer worker's discovery exposed a truth hidden beneath the illusion. No fortress is perfect. No empire is immune. Every power, no matter how mighty, rests upon fragile foundations. Wealth is never static. Gold, currency, credit, these are promises of stability, yet they rely on trust. In Victorian Britain, confidence in the Bank of England was as valuable as the bullion in its vaults. The sewer worker's discovery was a reminder that trust can be shattered by the smallest breach. Imagine if news had spread that the empire's gold could be touched from below. Panic could have rippled through markets. Confidence could have cracked. The empire's financial foundation might have trembled over a hole no wider than a man's shoulders. Empires are built on layers. Visible power above, invisible labor below. London's grandeur relied on invisible networks of drains, docks, ships, and workers whose names were never recorded. The bank's vault was just one symbol of this architecture, strong above, vulnerable below. History shows us that collapse often comes not from the expected direction, but from the overlooked. Rome fell not only from invasions, but from corruption within. Spain's Silver Empire was undone not on the battlefield, but by inflation and debt. Britain's Golden Vault rested above a drain. The vulnerabilities of empires are always where they least expect them. The Victorians built walls of stone and vaults of iron to convince themselves of permanence. Yet the very existence of the bank's vulnerability revealed how fragile security truly was. Wealth, power, even empire itself, are never absolute. They rely on human vigilance, on perception, and on luck. The sewer worker's story was a crack in the illusion, a glimpse of how close disorder always lingers, hidden just out of sight. What happened beneath the Bank of England was not unique. History is filled with stories where the invisible world beneath threatens the visible one above. In ancient Rome, aqueducts brought water but also provided secret entry routes for invaders. In Paris, revolutionaries used sewers to evade authorities. In New York, subway tunnels once became havens for the homeless. The lesson is clear. The underworld, whether physical, social, or political, always shadows the world above. To ignore it is to invite collapse. The sewer worker's discovery forces us to ask, what keeps an empire standing? Is it gold in a vault? Is it armies abroad? Or is it the invisible, uncelebrated labor of those below? Victorian Britain relied on miners digging coal, sailors crossing oceans, laborers building railways, and yes, even sewer workers keeping the city clean. Without them, the empire's wealth would rot. The vault may have symbolized permanence, but the truth is, the empire was balanced on the backs of men whose names it never bothered to record. Why does this forgotten story matter today? Because the pattern has not changed. Our modern world still builds fortresses of finance, still convinces itself of permanence, still buries the invisible labor that sustains it. Every skyscraper rests on foundations. Every digital economy rests on wires, cables, and unseen workers. Every modern bank vault, physical or virtual, still carries its vulnerabilities. The sewer worker of Victorian London reminds us, power always has a weak point, and wealth always sits on fragile ground. In the archives of the Bank of England, the story of the sewer worker is little more than a footnote. His name is lost, his life unknown. He left no memoir, no photograph, no trace beyond the single moment he stumbled upon a drain that led to the empire's treasure. And yet, his discovery lingers. It lingers not because of what was taken, but because of what it revealed, that history is not only written by kings and bankers, but also by the ordinary men and women whose lives brush against the machinery of power. Who was he, this man beneath the streets of London? A sewer worker, yes, but also perhaps a father, a husband, a son, someone whose daily life meant crawling through the filth of the city so others could walk above in comfort. He represents countless others, coal miners choking in darkness, dockhands unloading ships in the fog, laborers laying bricks in the rain, men and women who kept the empire alive while never appearing in its portraits. The sewer worker joins a vast lineage of forgotten people whose actions shaped history in ways small and large. The peasant who tilled Rome's fields, the sailor who spotted land for Columbus, the nameless builder who laid the foundation of the Great Wall. We remember emperors, generals, and kings, but history depends just as much, if not more, on those whose names are lost. In that sense, The man beneath the Bank of England is not alone. He is a symbol of history's silent majority. The irony is profound. In that moment, the poorest man in the city may have been the closest to the empire's wealth. Gold, stacked in vaults, guarded by soldiers and iron doors, all unknowingly within reach of a man whose pay barely bought bread. He touched the underside of empire, and in doing so revealed the absurdity of wealth, that it can be hoarded, protected, idolized, and yet be utterly meaningless if it rests above a crack in the earth. Why remember him now? Because his story is not only about Victorian London. It is about us. In our world, invisible workers still crawl beneath the surface. Data cables laid across the ocean. Power lines maintained in storms. Migrant laborers harvesting food. Warehouse workers ensuring packages arrive on time. We live above invisible networks, just as London once did. The lesson of the sewer worker is that we ignore these hidden foundations at our peril. They are fragile, they are human, and they matter. The sewer worker's story also whispers a larger truth. Empires fall, not with thunder always, but with cracks in the foundation. Rome, Spain, Britain, each convinced itself of permanence, each undone by forces it did not see. The drain beneath the Bank of England was not the cause of collapse, but it was a metaphor for what always lies beneath power: fragility, vulnerability, impermanence. Empires may build vaults of stone, but time, erosion, and the forgotten worker always find the cracks. In the end, this is not a story of theft, or wealth, or empire. It is the story of a man. Anonymous, forgotten, but real. A man who walked through darkness, lantern in hand, and by accident, brushed against history. His legacy is not the gold he found, but the reminder he left, that history is shaped by people like him, people like us, whose names may never appear in ledgers, but lives keep the world turning. So the next time you pass a bank, a skyscraper, or a monument of power, remember, beneath its stone and steel, unseen hands built it. Beneath every empire, there are cracks, and somewhere in the dark, a forgotten man once held a lantern and revealed the truth. This was just one of the many forgotten stories buried beneath history's surface. If you were intrigued by this untold chapter of Britain's past, imagine how many more remain hidden in the shadows. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just following another YouTube creator. You're joining a community that refuses to let history's secrets fade away. Hit that like button to help more people discover these hidden truths. Share your thoughts in the comments so we can keep the conversation alive, and subscribe with the bell turned on so you'll never miss the next untold story. Because here, the past is never truly silent. It just waits to be uncovered.